profession of career astronaut is one of the most difficult because not only you have to be the best in terms of skills and intellectually, you really need to develop the character to be able to function productively in extreme environments. And extreme environments are very tricky.
In the 50s, when I was a little boy, there was a lot of science fiction on TV. I mean, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, Tom Corbett, Space Cadet. Instead of playing cowboys and Indians, I used to play Space Raiders with my best friend. Actually, when I became an astronaut, he came to my first launch and he said he couldn't believe that the little boy that he had played Space Rangers with is now going up into space. At the same time, you'd have the articles in Collier's magazine about how we're going to go to the moon and how we're going to reach Mars.
And then, in October 1957, Russia shocked the world by sending the first man-made object into Earth's orbit.
It really was a big deal. They would print predictions in the newspaper of when Sputnik would fly over a given place. Dad took me and a couple of friends over to the high school football field, and sure enough, there it was. Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. Boy, was it going fast. And it wasn't blinking like an airplane. So clearly there was something new under the sun. My father was an orthopedic surgeon, and he was really busy. He spent an enormous amount of time with us. He built this incredible model train set up in our attic. And when he ever found time to do that, we never figured out. I don't actually know when Dad bought the telescope because I don't ever remember a time when he didn't have it. I looked at this to see the craters of the moon. I don't think anybody who's ever seen the rings of Saturn for the first time will ever forget that moment. You look at pictures all the time, but somehow you put your eye to a telescope and, oh my God, it's real, I see the rings of Saturn. I got interested in figuring out how the planets move. My parents used to take me to the planetarium. I don't know what it was that particularly struck me, but there was something about the stars, how far away they are, and how big the universe seemed to be, and a whole lot to my third grade teacher. When I would be doodling pictures of rocket ships, she realized that I loved astronomy and that I was intelligent. She gave me my first astronomy book, Our Starland, because that's really where I started. It was a neat book for kids because it combined astronomy with the legends of the constellations. It sort of feeds the fantasy part as well as the scientific part. I took a copy of it on one of my space flights as a commemorative. When did I start wanting to be an astronaut? Probably when I was 10 years old. You know, I always thought it would be neat flying in space. Then people actually started doing it. I saw Yuri Gagarin and John Glenn do it. I'd followed Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Skylab. All those astronauts were military test pilots, and that was not for me. But I was interested in space in the sense of astronomy. After high school, went off to college, went to graduate school, did a postdoc in England, came back with a wife and a little son, settled down at MIT doing X-ray astronomy, figuring that this was the start of what I hoped would be an academic career. And then all of a sudden, NASA says, hey, we've got this new vehicle that's going to fly very often. And by the way, it has a crew of 7, and we only need 2 pilots. And so we really want scientists and engineers and medical doctors as well to become astronauts. We had, I think, 8,000 valid applications, and they selected 35 of us. Then at the very beginning of July, I showed up for work as a NASA astronaut. Our family was Reform Jewish. Didn't often go to Shabbat services. It was mostly the high holidays. Really wasn't until we got down to Houston that we joined a synagogue. Choosing which one to join was easy because there was only one in the neighborhood. It had to serve the whole community, which meant there were people more Orthodox, people more Reform like us, and so they were conservative. That was very interesting for me because there were many practices which we hadn't really known much about. I always felt I was learning a lot about my own heritage. The rabbi was Arnold Stiebel. He asked me if I had any interest in taking some Jewish ceremonial objects into space with me. So when I made my first space flight, a weaver handmade talisim, I couldn't take those into space, but the atarot for each of them, we came up with special passages, and I took those with me. And then when we got back, sewed them onto the talisim, which our sons used at their bar mitzvahs. And when each of them were married, we draped the top of the huppah with those two talisim. We launched 2 satellites on that flight, but one of the satellites didn't turn on properly.
Crew reported they have not seen the deployment of the Omni antenna.
And I was one of those 2 crew members trained to use the spacesuit. And so my partner and I made what was actually the very first contingency spacewalk in NASA's entire history to go out and try to fix the satellite.
Hey, this went on easily enough.
Looks like you just did a super job there.
So I came back with my EVA spacewalking union card, right? When people ask what was the most significant thing that I felt I ever did, I would always say repairing the Hubble Space Telescope.
Years in development, the Hubble telescope promised to provide brilliant, never-before-seen images of other galaxies. But it failed to deliver.
People who didn't live through that time, I think, don't really appreciate what a disaster it was when it was found out that Hubble couldn't focus properly. Hubble was denounced in the halls of the US Congress as a techno-turkey. It was the butt of jokes on late-night television shows. Luckily, Hubble was designed to be serviced. NASA and the astronomy community went into full gear coming up with the proper optics and the proper mechanisms so that astronauts could actually put them in. It was decreed because the mission was so critical that if you were going to fix Hubble, you had to have done a spacewalk before. And I started to get, could it really happen, And then the deputy chief of flight operations called me and he said, well, congratulations, you're on the crew. I was absolutely ecstatic. In a sense, even more than when I got selected as an astronaut because I knew how much this meant. I mean, it was clearly the most complex shuttle mission that had ever been attempted.
NASA built a full-size mock-up of the Hubble telescope, a virtual reality lab, and a 40-foot deep neutral buoyancy tank, where the Hubble repair team trained for over a year to prepare for this uniquely delicate mission.
The corrective optics, a whole series of little mirrors, each of them about the size of your thumbnail, just put it at the right shape, at exactly the right place. The critical thing, of course, is that you're working out in a vacuum in a big, bulky spacesuit, and your hands are encased in big, bulky gloves. So we had some pretty tough problems that we had to solve, but basically it all worked. On our crew that rescued Hubble, the first people to demonstrate that spacesuited astronauts can actually undertake work of that level of complexity. And we did it. It was a real tribute to the thousands of people who worked on the repair mission. It's a huge team effort, and of course the astronauts are the ones that the public sees in the TV, but being able to work as part of a team is so important. And it was a great team. The whole idea behind servicing is the quality of detecting instruments that we can put in the telescope is constantly improving. I mean, Judaism has the tradition of tikkun olam, to repair the world, to improve the world. We're not replacing the world, but without our care and attention, things deteriorate, and to fix them is an important mitzvah.
At the same time, the crew was celebrating that Hubble could now bring in light from the far corners of the universe, Jews all over the world were celebrating a miracle of light from a faraway time.
December of 93, when we went up to rescue Hubble, it happened to be Hanukkah. There were 5 days of spacewalking. But after the repairs were complete, we had a day of rest, so to speak. I couldn't have latkes, okay, but I could take a dreidel. I thought it would be kind of neat to just take it and spin it. And I was doing that, not realizing that the TV camera on the middeck was live. And then all of a sudden, I heard the voice of Susan Helms, who was our Capcom and Mission Control. Hey, Jeff.
All of America would like to know what you've got and what you're doing with it.
So I thought, all right, this was going to be private, but they asked for it, so here goes.
Hanukkah is the festival of lights, and to celebrate it, we light a menorah. You light one more every day until finally you have 8 candles, and we play a little game with a dreidel, and it's something that you spin, and then you see which side comes up, and according to that, you either win or lose. And I was just trying to see how you might reinterpret the rules for spaceflight, since there's no up or down.
And it turns out it was picked up by a Jewish television network in Los Angeles and turned into a movie which you can now get on YouTube. And I started getting mail from many people around the country who said, you know, how wonderful they thought it was, and it was very meaningful. And that's when I realized that, you know, maybe it was not just a personal thing, but it had significance for many other people besides just myself. In 1988, we decided to move closer to downtown Houston. And there we went to another synagogue, Brit Shalom. The rabbi there was Shaul Osachi. Ever since my 3rd space flight, Rabbi Osachi had been asking me, could you take a Torah into space? My initial reaction was, well, you know, a big Torah? No way. We're allowed to take a certain maximum volume and mass, and the Torah is just not going to make it. Finally, after years of looking for a Torah that would be small enough and yet was totally kosher and legible, Rabbi Osachi obtained one.
The whole idea of taking the Torah, it wasn't just for display. We were going to actually use it in the synagogue, and we wanted to connect every bar mitzvah to that Torah as a statement about the future of Judaism, and they were connected to that. So I had these faxed copies that were sent to me, and I had 3 or 4 7-year-olds, and I would point to a letter. We did a Dalet and a Resh, we did a Chaf and a Bet, and based upon children being able to read the text, it meant that the text was usable.
It qualified for flight, was put on the manifest, and the last Sabbath services before I had to go into medical quarantine, they had a special farewell ceremony, and we read the prayer for safe travel, a silver emblem of which was given by my congregation, which I took with me on the flight. I'm taking up the first Torah that's going into space. My Hebrew is not that great. So to actually learn a particular portion and then the flight gets delayed by a week, and so why not read the Bereshit, because then you can't go wrong.
This really was a new era in Judaism in space. So where would you begin reading the Torah? Bereshit bara, the beginning. If I remember, there were probably 25, 30 people that drove to Cape Canaveral for the launch. We were sitting across the lagoon, praying and encouraging success on this mission. And I can't imagine what it's like sitting where you were sitting, but from where we were sitting, it was spectacular.
This is a special Torah. But I think a lot of people don't appreciate what it went through. It was sitting, along with me, of course, on top of 4.5 million pounds of high explosive. And then you light the fuse, and the shuttle comes to life.
The engine started up, and all of the clouds started to kick out.
You actually feel it in your chest, and the ground is shaking.
But there was also a heat wave that kind of rolled through us as well. That was just literally a blast of reality about what this was all about.
About a minute into the flight, you break the sound barrier going straight up, and the vibration gets even more intense. And then after 2 minutes, the booster rockets fall off. The shuttle's main engines accelerate us up to almost 18,000 miles an hour. So the Torah and I were now in orbit. Personal objects that we take are packed up in flame-proof plastic and put in a safe place on the shuttle, and we don't have access to them. And so we very carefully separated the first page of the Torah and then made a very special holder for it, and that I could actually carry up in my pocket. An object like this should be packed in a beautiful case, and we have one here which was handmade by Nancy Pikus of our congregation. Inside we have the Yod, and I removed the 10 Commandments from the actual breastplate that's packed in the hold so that I could make a little mini breastplate that would be attached to this holder. When I actually unrolled the Torah, I couldn't help thinking back to how many years we had been working and thinking about doing this. And the reason I was recording it was because I realized that it would have been one thing to go up and say, I read from the Torah when I was up there, but very different when somebody can actually see and share the experience. I wanted to do it seriously, and I wanted to do it as well as I could because it was very important to me, and that I hope would be both acceptable and significant to other people, even if their Hebrew skills are much better than mine. It's Shabbat morning in Jerusalem and Shabbat evening back in Houston, Texas. This is a very special Shabbat in space, and what better time than Shabbat to read the very beginning of the Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. And in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
And that was that moment, the mysterious beginnings of Bereshit, where it says that there were created things that were good. It was good. Tov. To me, that was a religious experience, to hear it from space flight.
After the Torah was returned to me, we had a ceremony at the synagogue. We invited the rabbi from New York, from whom Rabbi Osachi had gotten the Torah, and he allowed us to perform the mitzvah that you can repair a Torah. So everyone in the congregation had a chance to do this, where he would scrape a tiny bit off of a letter, and then he would guide our hand and dip the pen in the special ink and repair the letter. And then the Torah actually went into use in the congregation.
My 3 children were part of the session that you had with the kids when you brought the Torah back, and they just were fascinated by the whole idea, trying to relate their Judaism to this phenomenon of this Torah now going up in space, which is right in front of them.
It's something that goes back thousands of years, and yet by taking it, I was affirming to myself first and then to all the people that I've been able to share this with, that this is something that we take with us also into the future, because as it says, you teach your children to read it and your children will teach their children, and that's how we keep going into the future.
There's this beautiful concept, Torah min hashamayim, Torah from heaven. And that's part of the phrase. The full phrase is Torah from heaven as refracted through generations. That means that it's a living document, that every generation can add to it, can interpret it. And here is our generation.
Reading the book of Exodus, the revelation of Torah at Mount Sinai, and that somehow it came down from heaven to Moses. So now we have a Torah that went back to heaven.
It's going to a different realm that is
Exactly.
a realm beyond which humans had previously been able to go to, and to take something that is holy, like a Torah, up into space makes space more special. We astronauts are human beings, and when we travel, like all explorers, we bring with us parts of our culture, our history, our traditions. And so in closing, not being able to recite the traditional prayer, what I would like to do is to read another prayer which I think is particularly appropriate for spaceflight. Upon seeing wonders of nature, including lightning, shooting stars, vast deserts, high mountains, and the sunrise, all of which we see and marvel at from here in orbit. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, osei ma'aseh breshit. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, King of the universe, the source of all creation. And with that, I would like once again to say Shabbat Shalom to all my friends back home and all over the world. It has been a new beginning. Shalom from Space Shuttle Columbia.